All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Webinar Wednesdays, or welcome back if you've joined in a previous session. I am Brandon Stifler. I'm back for another round of the series brought to you by the Beckhoff USA product team and marketing teams. So back in October of last year, we launched the series, and I was fortunate enough to kick us off with our inaugural episode on software development tools and automation. By the way, if you missed that one or any of the other previous episodes or episodes of the series, those recordings are available to download. I'll be dropping a link to where you can get those later on. But I am pumped for today because we are going to be talking about my personal favorite Beckhoff product, and that's saying a lot given our huge variety and selection. But yes, today we are diving into TwinCAT HMI. A perfect visualization package to complement the rest of the TwinCAT product family. So it's of course fully integrated with the rest of the Beckhoff ecosystem. It's the same development environment. You got seamless communication to the PLC. It's source control ready, right? All the attributes we'd expect as engineers or as developers. It's flexible, modular, all that important stuff. It just brings a ton of exciting features and capabilities that I get to show you today. So what's so exciting about an HMI platform, you might ask? And I suppose that's a valid question. I take no offense as someone that spends a lot of time thinking about them. But for many folks in the automation space, HMIs really are much more of an afterthought. So from my experience in the integration world, for instance, a lot of times the HMI spec, if there was one at all, was one of those things that just got tossed into a junior CE's lab to handle. And maybe there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's probably actually a good thing that machine interfaces can be developed without years and years of experience, right? The tools are just good. They're just good enough to provide that low barrier of entry. In other situations I've seen, maybe there's a nice, thorough HMI spec or a standard, but it was developed like 100 years ago for a platform, a hardware or software platform that's just hanging on by a thread. With data technology and graphics that weren't even modern for the time. Again, not necessarily the worst thing in the world if that HMI serves its purpose as an effective operator interface. That's our primary goal, right? But if for whatever reason you found yourself wanting more out of your HMIs, that brings us back to the question, what's so exciting about an HMI platform? And in this case, TwinCAT HMI, it's the possibilities. This product just happens to give us a really well-designed, forward-thinking platform to build on. It combines a standard set of tools that enables that same low barrier to entry, while also being such a powerful, flexible architecture that the opportunities for customization, for extension, are nearly endless. So fellow HMI nerds like myself, software automation guys, web dev or UI pros unite, because this is the platform we've been waiting for. I have 4 key points that I like to stress when presenting this product, and that's the architecture, the accessibility, or maybe better expressed as like the developer experience, the features, and then finally the extensibility, the coolest part. So my content today will loosely follow those points, and then I'll wrap it up with some material on just updates of the latest and greatest version, because we're always refining this product. So first, let's take a look at the architecture. And by that, I mean the high-level component architecture, as if we were piecing together a system. I'll also be touching on the framework architecture, the actual code behind the scenes, because that certainly deserves its own acknowledgments. But at this point, I'm referencing the web-based client-server architecture. So the front end of TwinCAT HMI is simply a website, just standard web technologies running in a browser. There's no installations, binaries, no extensions or add-ons. A TwinCAT HMI site is just like any other website. So right away, what does this give us, right? Cross-platform compatibility and a scalable distributed client model. So we can outfit our machine or process with as many HMI terminals as required without having to rely on any costly proprietary hardware or software. These devices just need a web browser to run and network access to the server. And then from the server perspective, similarly, it's just a piece of software, so it can run on almost any PC. and it serves the pages to one or many clients and facilitates the communication between one or many targets, which in this case we really just mean PLCs. All right, now keep in mind, just because it can do all of that doesn't mean it has to. The simplest configurations are still easily achievable and cost-effective on this platform as well. So for instance, running everything on a single controller and just using the video output from that device and like a dumb touchscreen monitor as your HMI terminal. The important part to understand is that regardless of where you start, you can always scale the requirements of your application, thanks again to that architecture. Also worth noting, the HMI being a website and built on web technologies does not in any way imply reliance or use of the internet. If you wanted to publish your HMI site on the cloud or make it accessible over the internet, that's absolutely doable. You can even implement the same sort of certificate-based TLS encryption used by every other public website. But the vast majority of TwinCAT HMI installations are just like regular on-prem closed networks, much like any other industrial automation application. There's a couple more notable advantages to using web clients of being based on these open standard web technologies. First, it's all the opportunities for customization. My favorite part about this product. So over the past couple decades, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, these have been the primary technologies for user interface development. This means there's countless resources and references available to build upon. That's page designs, control widgets, styling, animations, most of which are openly available online, and now all of which are feasible to reproduce right in an HMI. The reason that's important is because for many of us, our HMIs are an end-user facing component of the systems that we build, right? It's the operators or the customer's window into the machine. So if your company has, for instance, a strong style guide or they're very brand aware, brand focused, it also allows you to deliver a cohesive, polished product that can really kind of make a statement or be a differentiator from the competition. The other benefit there that comes with all this web tech sort of maturity is that websites have become increasingly adaptable to run on any device. And we typically use this term responsive to convey that layouts can sort of adjust or reorient in real time, providing an ideal user experience regardless of the screen, the resolution of the screen, the size, or the aspect ratio. I think this is a particularly relevant topic for HMI developers because if you've been around the block a little bit like me, you've probably had to deal with different issues when changing your target screen type. And this could typically lead to a lot of rework on an HMI application that might have been thought to be a simple port from one panel model to another. TwinCAT will work on any device from big, huge widescreen monitors to your smartphone in portrait mode. And at this point, you might be saying, well, all that web technology sounds really great, but I'm not a web developer, right? I'm a controls engineer. And that is absolutely a valid concern. We understand that HTML, JavaScript, CSS, these are not tools typically found in a control engineer's bag. But we also didn't set out to subvert anyone's expectations of what HMI development should look like. Right? Our intent, rather, was to offer all this web-based, all the advantages of this web-based architecture and the flexibility while maintaining, again, that low barrier to entry so that anyone can pick up this tool and use it and have some familiarity. So, no, you don't have to be like this sweaty guy to build a nice web-based HMI. Accessibility has been a primary design consideration for this product from the start. Remember, it was the first of those 4 key points, or the second of those 4 key points. So, of course, you develop in the same unified Visual Studio-based environment as all the other TwinCAT tooling. You only pay for a runtime license, so you can build and test at no cost, again, just like TwinCAT PLC. And then we have a familiar, easy-to-use tooling like we have a project generator, we have a drag and drop designer, again, just like you'd expect, and you can get started without a huge learning curve. And probably easier to just kind of show you this, let you see it in action rather than just talk about it. So here I just have a quick little video, and starting out, I am working in a solution that already has a TwinCAT project. It has a basic PLC program. And again, my HMI project is going to drop in right alongside it. So they're going to be in the same solution within our development environment. I'm going to leverage this feature we have called the project generator, which is basically like a quick start wizard for creating a new HMI project. And it's going to allow me to specify some high-level layout, theme, and navigation properties. I also have these nice visual editors for piecing together kind of the overall look and feel of my site. So you can see I'm like dragging the navigation pane around wherever I want that to live. And then I can go through some initial page setup where I can select different kind of container layouts where the actual content that I build out is going to go, organizing control and information displays. There's some useful default views like overview page, a table for my alarms and events. I can drop in common features like our EtherCAT diagnostics control, which is an awesome feature that we'll talk about a little bit later. But when we make it through that wizard, you can see we'll have ourselves a project that's ready to be built out. So we're not starting from absolute scratch. And then we can also test this right away. We have this embedded live view browser, again, right within the same environment. And we could see we have the layout that we specified. We have working navigation, the pages that we set up. And here I'll illustrate that responsive design. Notice the containers and even the navigation pane, they collapse or they wrap to adapt with the size of the window. In this project, we even implement basic localization right out of the box. Now, with regards to that, obviously, as I build out my application, I add my own custom text and labels and things like that. I'll need to provide the translations for those. But by using this generator, I have functional examples of how that works. I have a reference of exactly how to accomplish that when I need to go fill all that stuff in. So I don't have to go digging for those features like if I were starting again from scratch. That's why when you're kind of file newing with a TwinCAT HMI project, we suggest you start with that generator because it just kind of sets you up for success with building out the rest of your project. And next, I'm going to quickly show the WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get designer. And this is a fancy way of saying I can drag and drop controls on the page and they're going to render like I expect them to. Again, this is the very typical HMI sort of workflow or developer experience. So working off that same project, I'm just going to open a blank page and then load the toolbox, and you'll just get a glimpse of all the available standard controls that you get out of the box. And I'm just going to drag a few of them on the page, move them around, just kind of show you, again, what that sort of experience looks like. Again, very typical. Then I'm going to expand the markup view that we have to show you how the framework is actually generating the HTML in real time as I modify this page. So even if you don't feel like a web developer, you are indeed creating a web application. The tool is just writing the code for you. Then finally, I'm just going to kind of close the workflow loop and bind a property, a text property of the control to a PLC tag. And we in TwinCAT HMI, we typically call these symbols, but same idea. And then there, in just a few minutes, we've made some really good progress toward building out our HMI. And then again, hopefully by seeing this, you get an idea of what the development process might look like. It should seem fairly approachable. It should seem kind of familiar with other tools you might have used. Okay, so having covered the absolute basics, there's a couple more features I wanted to quickly call out that provide a little more sort of advanced functionality, but still don't require you to be a web developer or write any code. If, for instance, you need to evaluate some conditional logic within your HMI, again, very typical feature, you can use what we call this actions and conditions editor. It's a visual no-code editor for building out those expressions like if-else or case statements. You can trigger these from any type of event, a control event, for instance, a button press, or tag-based events like on the change of a PLC value. Then you can use those actions to do any number of things, read or write data, call functions, modify other elements on the page, just all sorts of stuff. And then whatever you create in this editor can also be reworked into what we call action templates, which then produces a generic parameterized version of the logic that you built out here that is then reusable throughout the rest of your project. So, and that sort of concept of modularity, reusability is going to turn up over and over and again as I talk about this product. But similarly, that concept can be applied to groups of controls as well. You can create what's called a user control, which is a reusable collection of standard controls with parameters that you define. So if you have instances of identical data structures or behaviors in your PLC program, function blocks, this is a way to template out the graphical side of that and avoid duplicating your efforts, kind of like the object-oriented approach to creating reusable graphics. Finally, a lot of times expressions can simply be inlined right within a control property, like performing simple math operations or appending text on the end of a value. That's all easily accomplished as well. But long story short, there's several features that enable this powerful modular functionality, can save you a lot of time, still without having to write a single line of code. And now naturally, as I bring that up, some of you might be thinking, well, what if I do have some web dev experience or some JavaScript chops, and I am willing to kind of dig in and write some code? That's when stuff gets really fun and really interesting. But before we get into that, I do want to make sure to call out a few more noteworthy features. There's a couple that we already saw quickly in action, like that localization, the alarming and event system that's all kind of tied in with the rest of the TwinCAT's event system. But then there's some additional features you might expect, like user management, historization and trending, recipe management. And while I don't have time to dig into each one of these, show you how they work or how to use them, I list them out primarily just to emphasize the fact that they're all included in the base product license, right? There's no additional cost associated with using any of these. Finally, wrapping up on features, we have this whole other list. I like to call them ecosystem features, which are most easily described as the nice little pat on the back you get for using Beckhoff products, which complement each other so well. So for instance, first and foremost, and I touched on this earlier as well, our EtherCAT diagnostics control. And the wonderful thing about this control is that you get so much value for virtually no effort. There's really no setup or configuration. You just point this control to your EtherCAT master and you're done. The topological view of your whole I/O configuration is automatically rendered. You can very intuitively navigate around, zoom, pan, drill. It's kind of like using Google Maps, really, and that's with touch or with a mouse. You can drill into each EtherCAT slave device, see all the live process data associated with that. You'll also get a real-time diagnostic information, like if a bad cable shows up, that'll show up, or a malfunctioning slave device, right? It's all easily identified through this tool, and it's all real-time. You can even go as far as forcing input or output values through this tool, inhibited based on something like user permissions. But really anything we can do to improve the I/O, field bus, or communication troubleshooting experience is obviously an absolute win. So super awesome control there. It's a relatively recent addition and definitely everyone's favorite. But I think it plays well to what we're seeing as kind of a growing paradigm shift in the industry, which is this prioritization of strong troubleshooting and diagnostics capabilities right from the HMI, or maybe even from upstream data acquisition systems, rather than having to go online with the PLC and peruse the program logic. That's kind of turning out of favor. But I'm curious to hear your guys' opinions on that. There's kind of the different schools of thought there. Feel free to leave a comment in the chat or a question in the Q&A. Anyways, we got a few more ecosystem features as well to touch on. We have the MDP extension, which gives you sort of your PC performance and diagnostics information just exposed to the HMI, like your processor and memory utilization, stuff like that. There's our scope control, which gives you a lot of the high resolution data visualization features of our scope products, but right within your HMI clients. There's also the XTS control, similar to the EtherCAT diagnostics, where you just point it to your XTS configuration and it animates the real-time position feedback of the movers. It renders however your track system is laid out, does all that automatically. And then the TwinCAT vision control, which totally just trivializes bringing in image data or live streams of your machine vision system right into the HMI. There's even a few more of these that are brand new or coming soon, and I'll cover those, but I'm saving them for kind of the end where we go over all the latest and greatest. Finally, we're ready to dive into what is, in my opinion, the best part of the product, and that's the extensibility. So there's a lot to cover in this regard, but I've broken it down into the following. We have front-end extensions, which include the web technologies we already touched on in the beginning and how you can leverage those to customize your clients. And then we even have back-end extensions as well, or adding functionality to the server side of TwinCAT HMI and what that looks like. Both pieces are extensible to the point that, again, the opportunities for custom functionality is nearly endless. My favorite way to explain this product, TwinCAT HMI, and its capabilities is with the phrase, if you can dream it, you can do it. So on the front end, I'll cover just styling first. That's kind of the first typical go-to. And as with any flexible tool, there's a bunch of different ways to do kind of the same thing. If I just want to modify the style of a particular control and apply it to all instances of that control, I can use this nice organized theme editor, we call it. This gives me just an interface to tweak individual control properties and applies them at basically a global level. So that's kind of easy mode. But remember, TwinCAT HMI site is just like every other web page. So I have a CSS file that I can modify directly if I want as well. So I can apply global styling changes, for instance, change the font of the whole application here, or I can target specific controls by ID or groups of controls by their attributes. And these are kind of CSS terms, but it's still kind of pretty straightforward. I don't suggest changing your whole application's font to Comic Sans, but it's just an example. I like to have fun with it. So how do I know which attributes to modify? Through these sort of really nice developer tools, right in the embedded browser, again, right in the development environment, I can sort of peruse every bit of markup and styling that results in exactly what we're seeing on the page. So I can navigate around, I can hover or click on the elements to jump to their respective sort of code. And then I can even tweak these attributes from here as well. I can add or remove values, I can modify the existing values, and I can preview exactly what visual effects they'll have on their elements. So if I'm new to all this technology, there's a lot that I can learn just from kind of fiddling around it here. All right, so let's finally get on to some scripting. If you want to get started with JavaScript or TypeScript, both are options in TwinCAT HMI, also important to point out, and they can be used interchangeably. The easiest way to start would be just with a basic function. And functions are super cleanly implemented in TwinCAT HMI, and there's a few reasons for that. So when you create a new function, it's accompanied by a metadata file, which tells the framework exactly how to use that function. You can see in this editor, we've outlined some parameters, given them names, and most importantly, specified the appropriate data types. When we go to use the function, first of all, we can call it right from that actions and conditions editor from earlier. After we do that, we have this visual presentation, and then we have a really nice integration where the format of each one of those parameters is specific to the type that it accepts. And this function obviously isn't doing anything particularly useful, but what I really want to illustrate was how we're able to provide even more advanced functionality while maintaining usability. So a consumer of this function can easily implement it without having to know all the details. So we can write libraries of functions for the rest of our team, and then they have this nice interface to actually implement those functions. And then we take that same concept, again, kind of to the next level with what we call framework control. And this is where I said I would be paying lip service to the code framework, because this feature is a great illustration of why it's so well designed. So first, a framework control is intended to be used just like any other control in TwinCAT HMI. We just want to be able to drag it onto the page, tweak some properties, maybe bind them to some PLC data, and off you go. However, with a framework control, you completely define everything about it. So the HTML and CSS, or the look and feel of the control, the properties of the control, what's exposed in the editor, and these are defined by a metadata file as well, similar to what we saw with functions. Then finally, the actual code or behavior of the control itself in either JavaScript or TypeScript. Again, they're interchangeable. So this is where you truly have full control to do whatever the heck you want, and it's almost like starting with a blank slate. However, you can see here the code that we've extended, this
has this base control type, this TCHMI control, and this is the same base type inherited by all the standard controls. This gives our new custom control a handful of foundational properties and methods and allows the framework to treat it in many ways identically to all the others, even if we're doing a bunch of fancy stuff within the code. That's why once it's built, it can be dragged right onto the page just like any other control. This common interface also greatly simplifies how we interact with other components of the platform, most notably with symbols or PLC data. If you have exposure to other UI frameworks, you probably recognize this hierarchical or composite design pattern for controls. It's quite popular for enabling this flexible and modular UI design. Maybe you've used Windows Forms, WPF, a number of others, Qt. You'll probably be right at home extending TwinCAT HMI's functionality. We've seen customers and internal resources really take this feature and run with it to build some awesome controls. It's very straightforward to implement third-party libraries within a framework control as well. So again, leveraging those endless resources available online. I expressed this before, but I'll say it again. If there's any kind of graphical element or widget that you come across online that you think would make a solid HMI control, there's a very good chance that it can be replicated within TwinCAT HMI. And then as the user of this control, the end user, I don't necessarily have to understand exactly how it works. I'm just treating it, again, like any other control. I want this switch control to be able to toggle a Boolean PLC tag, so that's how I program it for my users. And then they just have to drag it in, bind it, and use it. You can create as many of these as you want. They can be bundled up and shared in packages, NuGet packages. So team members or collaborators, other people in the organization can simply add this package as a reference and have access to all of my organization's custom control set with all the necessary dependencies available in their toolbox. Moving on to the back end, we run into a familiar modular approach. We only briefly talked about the server, how it serves the clients, how it handles the communication with the PLCs, but there's a lot of other functionality it accounts for as well. For instance, managing all the data for features like historization, recipe management, doing authentication or authorization for user management, connectors for the data behind some of our special controls like EtherCAT diagnostics or vision. And the way these work is they are broken out into individual processes that we call server extensions. And we can see which ones are installed here, right here in our project. So we can easily add or remove these based on the needs of our application. If, for instance, I don't need recipe management, I don't need to include it in my project. But maybe I need some other functionality, like, for instance, tying into Active Directory to authenticate my users. I can simply add that extension via the package manager and then configure it in my project.
Again, one more time, can't harp on it enough, this sort of modular architecture to be able to add and remove components based on the needs of the application.
Now, of course, all these extensions share, again, a common interface so that the core server process can manage them. So they can all share data with our clients or amongst each other even. And again, this common interface can be leveraged to create your own custom server extensions with whatever functionality we want. If we're using Visual Studio, we can even build out that extension as just another project in the same solution as the rest of our projects. We currently support both .NET Framework and .NET Core extension types, so you have all the power and resources of the C# and .NET ecosystem at your disposal here. Again, if you can dream it, you can do it. If you're interested to learn more about this capability, what you can do with it, what the implementation might look like, I invite you to check out Beckhoff's GitHub page. We have a big, huge repository with a bunch of sample extensions, and this would give you a good idea of where to start when building one of these out. There's a ton you could do in the back end here, so way too much to cover in a webinar, but hopefully just kind of explaining the philosophy and again the architecture helps you understand what's possible. Also, I run internal trainings on this product at least once a year. Back in 2023, I led the class through creating a Modbus TCP server extension. Again, just to illustrate a relatively simple example of one of these. And that resource is publicly available on GitHub as well. It contains a nice markdown guide that you can follow along on your own. Okay, so finally we've made it to the what's new portion. The latest and greatest major revision of TwinCAT HMI, this 1.14, or sometimes expressed as 14.1, was released just a few months ago, and it brings continued refinement of the product in the form of features and quality of life improvements. The first of those would be support for 64-bit development environments. So up until the 2022 version, Visual Studio was actually exclusively a 32-bit application. Now, this newest 2022 version is 64-bit, and our newest version of our engineering software, XAE Shell, is based on the 2022 version. So as you saw throughout this presentation, you can stuff a lot of projects, a lot of different types of projects into a single solution if you so choose. Previous 32-bit versions would sometimes struggle with this a little bit, so being able to take advantage of the extra speed and memory utilization of the 64-bit environment has been a great improvement. Next, we have two more brand new extensions to touch on. We have the motion control for TwinCAT NC, which gives you an HMI control with a lot of the same features as the servo configuration tools built right into TwinCAT. And this one is available right now, free of charge. Another excellent example of sort of these Beckhoff ecosystem features with this tie-in to NC. Then we have an audit trail extension that is currently in open beta, so you can load it from our testing feed and use it right now. But this one allows you to track symbol changes with timestamps. You can generate reports, and it allows you to enforce comments or digital signatures before changing critical values. And you just set that up all through the extension. So this would be relevant to you if you need to comply with a regulatory guideline like FDA's 21 CFR Part 11. Finally, last but not least, just some extras for the geeks like me out there. We have updated the base styling, loosely following Google's material design language. It's just a more modern look and feel with kind of less busy graphics, gradients, shadows, stuff like that. As you can probably tell, we're pretty big on fit and finish and keeping up with what's popular in the industry here at Beckhoff. Soon you'll be able to develop server extensions not just in C# but also in Python. This is a huge plus not only for the extended language support, but also because you no longer need a full Visual Studio installation to build server extensions. Right? A lot of the Python tooling is totally free and open source. We've added JavaScript and TypeScript module support. This is helpful when dealing with a lot of modern third-party libraries or frameworks. Like for instance, importing a React component to use with TwinCAT HMI, totally doable. Then two-factor authentication for increased security, obviously. And finally, an auto map feature. These auto map attributes really simplify development and symbol mapping between PLC and HMI. So again, we are always improving and refining this product with both major and minor additions. But that about wraps it up for me today.
We're going to end again with some open Q&A for a few minutes. There's a little question area in the go-to interface if you didn't see that already. I'll also keep an eye on the chat section as well for the next few minutes. But yeah, let's see if there's a couple. Oh, I've got a bunch that came in. Let me see if there's any that are assigned to me specifically or unanswered. All right, the first one we have is TwinCAT HMI included with the base runtime, or is it an additional module like the PLC HMI? So the difference between PLC HMI and TwinCAT HMI is, a lot of what we talked about. TwinCAT HMI is a little bit more kind of standalone. So it is not necessarily included in the base runtime. You'd have to install it separately. You'd have to install these kind of the server component. And then your client can be anything, anything with a web browser. But it is, yes, it's an additional sort of TF package, as we like to call them, an additional installation and an additional license to run that server. So why is the package manager showing TwinCAT HMI version as 14.2.13 instead of 1.14? So we did change sort of the way that we present the sort of naming of versions. So yeah, the latest and greatest would be 14.2 instead of 1.14, but it technically be 1.14.2 if we were conforming to kind of the old style of naming. It's just a little switch up that they did. All right, some other questions that I just get a lot around this product is One, is TwinCAT HMI only for Beckhoff PLCs? And that's a really good question. The answer is no. So one of the extensions that you can add to your TwinCAT HMI project, again, it's another server extension, is an OPC UA client. So then you can communicate. You have all the same sort of features dealing with symbols, binding them to controls, but it's with an OPC UA device instead of with ADS with our TwinCAT PLCs. So yes, another good one came in here. Brandon mentioned that 1.14 is only on 4026 for the 64-bit shell, and yes, that is correct. Unfortunately, 24 installations don't necessarily like to coexist with the package manager and with 4026 components. So you could conceivably use a 1.14 project with a 4024 runtime. There's nothing that's going to stop you from doing that, but the development environments are not going to want to coexist because the TwinCAT package manager kind of wants to clean out all that 4024 stuff before it installs any of the new 4026 stuff. And version 14 of TwinCAT HMI is no exception to that. So good question. What does the Web HMI Dev license cost? So we don't charge for any of our development and licenses. Good question. You can build all your PLC logic, all your HMI, your whole HMI project. Basically, any Beckhoff TwinCAT related project is going to be a free development environment. So you can download that right from our site. You can load in all the functions, all the extensions that you need, and you could develop and run on a 7-day trial license. That's the PLC runtime, that's the HMI server, that's all the components. When that 7 days is up, all you have to do is basically enter a CAPTCHA code and you get another 7 days, and that's in perpetuity. So there's no sort of barrier, there's no cost barrier to entry to get developing with virtually any Beckhoff products. Great question. Okay, got another one here about the auto mapping feature. To elaborate on that a little bit more is you'll have a dedicated attribute, and it's actually a collection of attributes that you can apply to your symbols within the PLC project. So you just tag them with that little attribute at the top, and then you press a button basically in the mapping section of your HMI configuration that says, hey, go out there, look for all the symbols that are tagged with this attribute, and bring them into TwinCAT HMI. And it's just called Auto Map Symbols. It brings everything in, and then you're ready to go with it within your HMI project. And maybe someone that's helping out with the questions in the chat can drop a link to the documentation on that, but it's available on our InfoSys. It'll tell you exactly what to put in those attributes, kind of what the options are. There's for a while now, there's also been a hide option. So if you didn't want a variable in your PLC to be able to get exposed to HMI, that functionality has been there a while now. Now we've just sort of built upon that and added some additional attributes that tie in with the HMI side. Okay, some more questions about versioning. Yes. So 4024 is 112, and even older, the 110. That's correct. And then 4026 via the package manager will work with 114. Again, if you use virtual machines for your development environment, the mechanism for connecting a TwinCAT PLC and the HMI server is just ADS. It's our open communication protocol. That hasn't changed. So you could conceivably have your 4026 development tools on one machine, or you even use the remote manager, which allows you to target 4024 controllers, and then have all the latest 4026 tooling in the version 14 of HMI on your other development environment. So they can work with each other. They just don't like to coexist from a development perspective on the same machine. So that MQTT extension is not through the PLC, correct? We have a bunch of MQTT related products. The most popular ones are through the PLC. So we have, for instance, an MQTT client that you can leverage right from the PLC. It's just a library that you bring into your PLC, and you program that to do your MQTT messaging. Our analytics tool also uses MQTT. This is kind of a tangent, so I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the connectivity products are also sort of my responsibility as well. So Okay, can the HMI program be down from the PLC to the engineering environment? I'm not sure I understand that one. Can be down from the PLC to the engine. Um, Downloaded from the really good question. Unfortunately, there's no like upload feature. I guess yeah, there's some debate over that nomenclature, right? If you're pulling the project from PLC, is that a download or an upload? Different people call it different things. Um, Unfortunately, not. No. So your HMI program sort of lives on the server. It lives just within the file system, but there's currently no way to upload from a target and pull the kind of whole project. And there's a couple different reasons like for that, but. So someone asked about the cost of the EtherCAT diagnostics control. That there's no cost to using that control. They also asked about what version of the server that you need to get that control. I do believe there was a version of that control, of that extension, released for the later versions of 1.12. I know it's available in all versions of 1.14. I would have to check on that, but it is no cost to use. Okay, how to set alarms in the HMI, the easiest way. So the easiest way would probably be to use the PLC functionality that TwinCAT has, we call the event logger. Then it's very much kind of drag and drop. You just tie the event logger is pretty much automatically tied to the runtime system that's on your target, the event logger of that target, and it sort of just works. And then you're throwing your events, your alarms, etc., through your PLC logic. Now, if you didn't use that, there is another extension, we just call it the alarm extension, that allows you to sort of specify your own custom alarms. Basically, point to a PLC tag, and you set up the conditions that create that alarm. So if it's a discrete value, you can just say when this Boolean goes high, throw this alarm. And on the front end, it uses all the same controls. So it uses that same event grid that we saw in one of the demonstrations earlier. But on the back end, it's sort of using a separate extension because it's not tying into TwinCAT's event system. It's kind of its own alarming system. So yeah, the extension is called TCHMI alarm, and it allows you to specify custom alarms based on that. And then I'll just do one more, and then we have to wrap it up. But is there anything from today's webinar specific to 4026? All of the new features that I called out specific to 1.14 are probably not going to be sort of back-ported to the 1.12 versions. But I think everything else that we talked about was cross-compatible. So the EtherCAT diagnostics control, which we touched on, I believe is available in 1.12, but the NC control, the motion control, is not. And maybe some of those other features that we touched on, like the Python server extensions, those are all going to be sort of exclusive to the new major revision. Also a good question. But that's going to wrap it up for me. Just some closing thoughts. Once again, I am Brandon Stifler at Beckhoff USA, Software Product Manager. If you would like to learn more about this product, again, it's my favorite product. I love talking about it. I love digging into it. On the screen, you should see these QR codes that have been up for a minute. There are contact forms. There are ways that you can learn about upcoming episodes in the webinar series. We've got one coming up with our product manager, Jeff Johnson, on the XMotion platform. And then I'll be back in a couple months doing another episode of the series on TwinCAT Analytics. One more thing I wanted to call out before signing off, there's a link over here for other reference web links to this cmi.beckoff-cloud.com. This is an online showcase of basically all the features that we talked about today. And it's a running HMI project that allows you to kind of peruse all the controls and all the features. And then there's even an application sample, so you can kind of see what the product looks like in a real application. It's simulated, obviously, but it could just give you a good idea what the product looks like in practice. So yeah, I encourage you guys to check that out. very much appreciate everyone's time today. Yeah, check out the webinar site for future episodes, and I will see you in a couple months to talk about TwinCAT Analytics.